I stared at Richard across his mahogany desk, watching 14 years of my life crumble in real time. The rain hammered against his corner office windows while HR Director Janet shuffled papers like a nervous card dealer. Richard's mouth moved, but I barely heard his rehearsed speech about new energy and fresh perspectives. The severance package slid across the polished wood, 2 weeks' pay for over a decade of building his company's success. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the pen, but not from fear. It was pure adrenaline, the kind that comes when you know you've been planning for this exact moment for 3 months. "Nothing personal, Sarah," Richard said, his voice trying to sound sympathetic. "We just need to restructure for the future." I signed the papers with a steady hand and smiled. That smile seemed to unnerve him more than tears ever could have. Standing up, I tucked the pathetic severance check into my purse and looked him straight in the eye. "Thank you for the opportunity, Richard. I wish you all the best." Walking out with my small box of personal items, I felt lighter than I had in years. Richard had no idea what was coming. 3 months earlier, I had walked into First National Bank with a solid business plan and 14 years of impeccable work history. The loan officer, Mr. Peterson, had been impressed by my track record and approved my business loan on the spot. "Miss Whitaker, your credit score and industry experience make this an easy decision," he had said, sliding the approval documents across his desk. "Congratulations on your new venture." That same week, I filed LLC paperwork for Whitaker Strategy & Co. The name felt powerful rolling off my tongue. I secured a charming office suite downtown, just 2 blocks from Pinnacle's headquarters. The irony wasn't lost on me. My website went live with minimal fanfare, a clean, professional design featuring my credentials and a subtle "coming soon" banner. I even bought Richard a congratulatory bottle of expensive wine when he got promoted to CEO, watching him beam with pride while I quietly laid my foundation stone by stone. The signs had been there for months. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Junior employees suddenly looped in on accounts I'd built from scratch. Credit given to me in private, but never in public. I wasn't surprised. Richard had always wanted to make his mark. I just didn't think he'd try to erase me to do it. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I sat in my new office, finger hovering over the send button of my carefully crafted announcement. The email would go out to 400 contacts, 14 years of relationship building distilled into one perfectly worded message. The announcement was elegant and professional. I celebrated my exciting new chapter and commitment to personalized client partnerships. I mentioned nothing about being fired. Why would I? This was a celebration, not a complaint. I clicked send and watched the email disappear into the digital universe. Within 30 minutes, my phone started ringing. The first call came from David Johnson of Johnson & Associates, Pinnacle's largest client and my personal contact for 8 years. His voice carried confusion and genuine concern. "Sarah, what happened? Richard never mentioned you were leaving. We've been trying to reach you for our quarterly review for 2 weeks." I explained my new venture calmly, professionally. David's relief was audible through the phone. "Thank God. We thought something terrible had happened to you. Richard keeps saying he'll handle everything, but he doesn't know our account like you do. Can we schedule a meeting this week?" By noon, I had fielded 6 similar calls. Each conversation revealed the same story. Clients had been told I was transitioning to new responsibilities, but were never informed I'd left entirely. Tuesday brought a flood of revelations that shocked even me. Margaret Chen from Pacific Industries called, and she was furious. "Sarah, he's been dodging our calls for 2 weeks, claiming you were handling everything. When I pressed him for details about our spring campaign, he couldn't answer basic questions about our target demographics." Client after client shared similar stories. Richard hadn't just failed to build relationships, he'd actively avoided them, hiding behind my reputation while taking credit for my work. By Wednesday, I had fielded 17 calls from existing Pinnacle clients, each expressing confusion, frustration, and a growing desire to follow me wherever I landed. The most telling call came from Robert Martinez at Cascade Manufacturing. "Sarah, I have to be honest with you. In 8 years of working with Pinnacle, Richard has attended exactly 3 meetings with us. You've handled everything: strategy, implementation, crisis management. If you're not there anymore, what exactly are we paying for? That evening, I sat in my new office as the sun set over the city. The reality hit me like a freight train. Richard hadn't just underestimated me. He'd built his entire business model around me, never realizing that the client saw me as their primary contact, not him. The foundation I'd laid 3 months ago was about to become my empire. Thursday morning, I met with attorney Lisa Rodriguez to review my employment contracts and severance agreement. Lisa had been my friend since college and one of the sharpest legal minds in Oregon. She flipped through the documents with growing amazement. "Sarah, this is incredible. There's no non-compete clause anywhere, not in your original contract, not in any amendments, nothing." I leaned forward, hardly believing it. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure. And look at this clause in your original agreement." She pointed to a paragraph I'd never paid attention to. "It clearly states that client relationships developed during your tenure belong to you as much as the company. You're not just free to compete, you're legally protected to maintain relationships you built over 14 years. Lisa grinned like a cat who'd caught a mouse. Richard's arrogance led him to believe you'd never be a threat. He saw you as a cog in his machine, not the engine that made it run. The oversight was stunning. All those years, Richard had the power to lock me down with legal restrictions, but his ego prevented him from seeing me as competition. That oversight was about to cost him everything. "Lisa, what does this mean practically?" "It means you can contact every single client you've worked with, and it's completely legal. Welcome to the free market, Sarah." Friday brought the moment I'd been preparing for. David Johnson requested an emergency meeting at my office. He sat across from my desk, his decision already made before he'd walk through the door. "Sarah, we're terminating our contract with Pinnacle, effective immediately. We want to sign with Whitaker Strategy & Co." The Johnson & Associates account represented $180,000 in annual revenue, money Richard couldn't afford to lose, especially not all at once. "David, I appreciate your confidence, but I want you to make this decision carefully. Don't move your business because you're upset with Richard." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, this isn't about being upset, it's about business sense. You've managed our account for 8 years. You know our company culture, our goals, our challenges. Richard, he couldn't tell you our company colors if his life depended on it." But David had more devastating news. "I spoke with 3 other Pinnacle clients at last month's Chamber of Commerce meeting. We compared notes about the service decline since your supposed transition. We're all considering the same move." By the end of our meeting, I had my first major client and confirmation that Pinnacle's foundation was cracking faster than Richard could possibly imagine. The domino effect had begun, and there was no stopping it now. Maria Santos called me over the weekend, requesting a confidential coffee meeting. Maria had been Richard's executive assistant for 6 years, and I'd always respected her professionalism and attention to detail. We met at a small cafe downtown, away from the business district where we might be recognized. Maria looked nervous, glancing around before leaning forward to speak in hushed tones. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that's been eating at me for months. Richard has been taking credit for your work in board meetings, claiming your successful campaigns as his own initiatives." My coffee grew cold as Maria revealed the full scope of Richard's deception. He'd been presenting my strategic plans to investors and board members, literally reading from documents I'd written while claiming he'd developed the concepts himself. "But there's more," Maria continued, sliding a flash drive across the table. "I've been updating your client contact database for months, and I kept backups of everything. Richard doesn't know I have copies." The flash drive contained 5 years of client communications, strategy documents, and campaign results, all bearing my work but Richard's name in the presentations. "Maria, why are you telling me this?" She looked me straight in the eye. "Because it's wrong, and because I've been watching you build genuine relationships while he takes credit for your brilliance. Someone needs to know the truth." Monday morning brought a surprise that shocked everyone, including me. Maria walked into my office with a resignation letter in one hand and a job application in the other. "Sarah, I want to work for you. I resigned from Pinnacle this morning." I stared at her, speechless. Maria's insider knowledge was invaluable. She knew every client's preferences, project timelines, and budget constraints. More importantly, she knew Richard's weaknesses, his tendency to panic under pressure, his inability to handle direct client contact, and his complete dependence on others for actual strategic thinking. "Maria, are you sure about this? You had job security at Pinnacle." She laughed, shaking her head. "What security?" "Sarah, the company is hemorrhaging money and clients. Richard spent an hour yesterday screaming at the coffee machine because it was out of his favorite pods. He's falling apart, and I refuse to go down with that ship." Maria's transition was seamless and professional. She even helped Pinnacle hire her replacement, training the new assistant for 3 days before officially starting with me. The gesture was so gracious that Richard suspected nothing until it was too late. Within a week, my office ran more efficiently than Pinnacle ever had. Maria brought organization, institutional knowledge, and a level of professionalism that elevated everything we touched. Richard had just lost his right hand and given it to his biggest competitor. 2 weeks later, lightning struck twice. Amy Chen and Marcus Thompson, 2 junior strategists I'd mentored at Pinnacle, approached me within days of each other. Amy came first, looking exhausted and frustrated. "Sarah, I can't take it anymore. Since you left, Richard has been taking credit for my work while publicly criticizing my contributions in team meetings." Marcus followed with an even more disturbing revelation. "The Morrison Industries campaign I've been leading is failing because Richard changed my strategy without telling the client. Now Morrison thinks I'm incompetent, and Richard is blaming me for the account problems." Both had been marginalized since my departure, and both revealed the same pattern. Richard's desperate need to appear valuable was destroying the people who actually created value. "He's impossible to work for," Amy said. Last week, he presented my entire social media strategy to Pacific Industries as his own idea. When they asked follow-up questions, he couldn't answer because he didn't understand the strategy he was presenting. By month's end, I'd hired both strategists. Word of the brain drain at Pinnacle began circulating through industry circles. Richard wasn't just losing clients, he was losing the talent that made client retention possible. The irony was beautiful. In trying to take credit for everyone's work, Richard had driven away the people who actually did the work. Oregon Business Journal published a feature article that changed everything. Tom Bradley, their senior business reporter, had written a piece titled "From Pink Slip to Powerhouse: The Sarah Whitaker Story." I read the article over my morning coffee, amazed at how far the story had traveled. Tom had interviewed 3 of my clients, all praising my integrity, innovation, and genuine partnership approach. While the article didn't name Pinnacle directly, anyone in the local business community could read between the lines. "Sarah Whitaker represents everything right about Oregon's business community," David Johnson was quoted as saying. "Her approach to client relationships sets the standard for professional excellence." The article included a photo of me in my new office, looking confident and professional. The caption read, "Whitaker's firm has achieved profitability in its first quarter, with a waiting list that extends into next year." My phone rang all day with congratulations from colleagues, potential clients, and industry contacts. The article had given me credibility that money couldn't buy. Third-party validation from respected business leaders. That evening, Maria told me she'd seen Richard at a downtown restaurant, reading the article on his phone with a look of pure shock. He'd finally realized that I wasn't just competing with him. I was winning spectacularly, and the whole business community was watching. Patricia Webb, Pinnacle's CFO, delivered devastating news to Richard in their monthly financial review. Maria heard the shouting through Richard's closed office door and filled me in later. Pinnacle had lost 40% of its revenue in 2 months, with 3 more major clients signaling they wouldn't renew contracts. The company's operating expenses remained the same, but income had plummeted off a cliff. Richard completely lost it, Maria told me. Patricia recommended immediate layoffs, office downsizing, and restructuring their service offerings. She basically told him the company was dying. The numbers were brutal. Richard had to cut his own salary by 30% just to keep the doors open. 2 junior employees were laid off, and the office manager was reduced to part-time hours. Meanwhile, my firm had become profitable in its first quarter. We had a waiting list of potential clients stretching 4 months into the future. The contrast was stark and getting wider every day. That night, I sat in my beautiful office looking out at the city lights and felt grateful for Richard's betrayal. His decision to fire me had freed me to build something better than I'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Richard began attending every networking event in the city, desperately trying to rebuild relationships he'd never bothered to cultivate. At the Chamber of Commerce mixer, I watched him corner business owners with increasingly frantic energy. His conversations were awkward and transparent. Everyone could see the desperation in his eyes as he tried to explain Pinnacle's exciting new direction and renewed focus on client service. The evening reached its peak of awkwardness when Richard approached Jennifer Walsh, owner of Walsh Consulting. I watched from across the room as his face fell when she told him she'd already signed with Whitaker Strategy & Co. "Sarah, this is almost painful to watch," David Johnson whispered to me. "He's burning bridges faster than he can build them." Richard's networking attempts were having the opposite effect he intended. Instead of rebuilding confidence in Pinnacle, he was advertising his company's problems to potential clients who might have otherwise remained unaware of the situation. By the end of the evening, Richard had spoken to 15 business owners. 3 told him they were happy with their current marketing partners. 7 expressed interest but said they'd heard good things about a new firm called Whitaker Strategy. 5 listened politely and took his card, which they probably threw away in the parking lot. Richard's desperation was becoming the talk of the business community, and not in a good way. Richard's brother pressured him into hiring his 24-year-old son, Kevin, as a junior director. Kevin had recently graduated with an MBA, but possessed 0 practical experience and an entitled attitude that immediately alienated the remaining staff. Maria, who still had friends at Pinnacle, kept me updated on the disaster unfolding across town. Kevin's first major assignment was a rebranding campaign for Cascade Manufacturing, one of Pinnacle's few remaining significant clients. The presentation was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Kevin arrived confident and unprepared, presenting a logo design that was nearly identical to Cascade's biggest competitor. The client recognized the similarity immediately. "Kevin literally tried to argue that similar doesn't mean identical," Maria reported. Robert Martinez asked him to leave the meeting. They terminated their contract that afternoon. The mistake cost Pinnacle $50,000 in potential revenue and destroyed what little remained of their reputation in the manufacturing sector. Kevin's failure became water cooler gossip throughout the industry. Within days, Richard found himself in an impossible position: fire his nephew and face family drama, or keep him and watch him destroy more client relationships. Either choice guaranteed more problems. The incident perfectly illustrated Richard's leadership philosophy: hire based on connections rather than competence, and hope for the best. That approach had worked when I was there to clean up the messes. Without me, every mistake became a catastrophe. The freelance designers and consultants who'd worked regularly with Pinnacle began jumping ship. Elena Rodriguez, a graphic designer I'd collaborated with for years, explained the situation over lunch. "Sarah, Richard's been late on payments, micromanages every creative decision, and takes credit for our work and client presentations. Last month, he presented my entire design concept to Pacific Industries as his own idea." Elena and 4 other freelancers had stopped accepting projects from Pinnacle and started working exclusively with my firm. We paid promptly, treated them as valued partners, and gave them creative freedom to do their best work. This exodus of reliable subcontractors forced Richard to work with inexperienced budget providers whose quality didn't meet client expectations. The decline in creative output created a downward spiral. Poor results led to client dissatisfaction, which led to lost accounts, which led to tighter budgets, which led to even worse creative partners. "It's become a joke in the freelance community," Elena told me. "Nobody wants to work with Pinnacle anymore. Word gets around about clients who don't pay on time or respect your creative input." Richard had managed to alienate both his full-time employees and his freelance talent pool. He was running out of people willing to work with him at any capacity. The irony was perfect. In trying to cut costs and maximize his control, Richard had destroyed the collaborative relationships that made quality work possible. While organizing old files in my new office, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Buried in my personal records were expense reports from the past 2 years showing Richard had charged client entertainment expenses to my accounts without my knowledge. Restaurant bills, sporting event tickets, weekend golf outings, all presented to clients as my relationship-building efforts, but actually Richard's personal entertainment. The amounts were significant, nearly $15,000 over 2 years. I sat staring at the documents, realizing this wasn't just unethical, it was fraud. Richard had systematically stolen from clients while making it appear that I was the one spending their money on entertainment. Lisa Rodriguez reviewed the documentation and confirmed my worst fears. Sarah, this is criminal fraud. He used your name and reputation to justify personal expenses, then charge them to client accounts. You could destroy him with this. But I faced a moral dilemma. Exposing Richard's theft would definitely end his career and possibly land him in jail. The documentation was thorough enough to prove intent, and the pattern was clear across multiple clients and many months. What do you want to do? Lisa asked. I thought about it for a long time. I want to focus on building my business, not destroying his. But I'm keeping these documents as insurance. Sometimes the high road is the hardest path, but it's the only one that lets you sleep well at night. Richard hired a marketing consultant to analyze my business model and develop a competitive strategy. The consultant's report landed on his desk like a bomb, and Maria managed to get me a copy through her contacts at Pinnacle. The analysis was devastating for Richard. My success wasn't based on undercutting prices or aggressive tactics, but on superior client service, innovative strategies, and genuine relationship building, areas where Pinnacle had consistently failed under his leadership. The report recommended that Pinnacle essentially copy my entire approach, admitting that my methods represented industry best practices that Richard's company had abandoned. The consultant wrote, Whitaker Strategy & Co. succeeds because they treat clients as partners rather than revenue sources. But the report's final recommendation was the most shocking. Consider approaching Sarah Whitaker about a potential partnership or acquisition of her firm. Her business model is superior to yours in every measurable way. Maria said Richard threw the report across his office after reading it. The consultant had basically told him that his former employee was running circles around him, and his only hope of survival was to beg her for help. The report cost Richard $5,000 and confirmed what everyone already knew. I hadn't just left Pinnacle. I'd improved on everything they'd ever done. The annual Oregon Marketing Awards ceremony arrived like a storm I'd been watching build on the horizon. I wore my best dress and attended with confidence, knowing that my first year in business had exceeded every goal I'd set. Richard was there too, looking uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo. He cornered me at the bar during cocktail hour, his approach clumsy and desperate. Sarah, maybe we could partner somehow. Bring you back to stabilize things. We could work together again. His words carried the weight of a man drowning and reaching for anything that might keep him afloat. I sipped my wine and studied his face, seeing genuine fear behind the fake smile. I appreciate the offer, Richard, but I've found I can serve my clients better independently. I wish you all the best. The conversation happened within earshot of several industry colleagues, and Richard's public desperation became tomorrow's gossip. He walked away looking smaller than when he'd approached. Later that evening, they called my name for the Emerging Business Excellence Award. Walking to the stage, I thought about how this honor should have been celebrating Pinnacle's success if Richard hadn't driven away his most valuable asset. The irony was beautiful. Richard had fired me to make room for his vision, and now I was being celebrated while his company crumbled. Word spread through the marketing community about Richard's mismanagement and the exodus from Pinnacle. At industry conferences and networking events, Richard found himself increasingly isolated as former peers politely avoided lengthy conversations. I watched it happen from a distance, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Richard had been respected in the business community for years, but his recent behavior had tarnished a reputation that took decades to build. Meanwhile, I was invited to speak on 3 different panels: building client relationships in a digital age, entrepreneurial success stories, and women in business leadership. Each speaking opportunity expanded my network and established me as a thought leader in the industry. The contrast was stark and getting more pronounced every month. While my reputation grew stronger, Richard's professional standing deteriorated with each public appearance and failed pitch presentation. It's like watching someone commit career suicide in slow motion, David Johnson told me after a particularly awkward encounter with Richard at a networking breakfast. The business community is smaller than people think, and word travels fast. Richard's struggles were becoming common knowledge, while my success story inspired others to take risks and pursue their dreams. Sometimes reputation is like a bank account. It takes years to build up and can be destroyed overnight. Morrison Industries requested a meeting with Richard to discuss their dissatisfaction with recent campaign results. The meeting became a termination notice, and Richard walked out of their offices knowing he'd lost his second largest remaining client. Maria heard the aftermath through Pinnacle's thin walls. Richard spent an hour on the phone with Patricia Webb, discussing whether the company could survive losing Morrison's $120,000 annual contract. He kept saying, "How did this happen?" over and over, Maria reported. Patricia finally told him that Morrison had been unhappy for months, but nobody at Pinnacle had been paying attention to their concerns. The loss represented more than just revenue. It signaled the end of Pinnacle's viability as a full-service agency. Morrison Industries had been with Pinnacle for 6 years, and their departure would send shockwaves through the business community. 2 days later, Morrison Industries called my office to schedule an introductory meeting. They'd done their research and knew about my track record with their industry sector. "Sarah, we should have made this move months ago," their marketing director told me. "We stayed with Pinnacle out of loyalty, but loyalty has to go both ways." By the end of the week, I'd signed Morrison Industries as a client. Richard had lost them forever, and I'd gained another major account. The shift was becoming a landslide. Patricia Webb presented Richard with 3 brutal options: immediate liquidation, bankruptcy filing, or a desperate attempt to restructure as a smaller boutique consultancy. The numbers painted a picture of complete business failure. Pinnacle owed $180,000 in outstanding expenses, had only 2 remaining clients worth $40,000 annually, and faced lease obligations and staff salaries that exceeded income by 300%. Richard signed personal guarantees on the office lease and equipment loans. Patricia explained to Maria, "If the company goes under, he's personally liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars." The company Richard had hoped to expand into a regional powerhouse had become a liability that threatened his personal assets and financial future. Every day he kept the doors open, he lost more money he couldn't afford to lose. Maria said Richard looked like he'd aged 5 years in the meeting. The weight of his poor decisions was finally crushing him, and there was no way out that didn't involve significant personal financial loss. "He keeps asking how Sarah did it," Maria told me, "how she built a successful company so quickly while his falls apart." The answer was simple, but hard for Richard to accept. I'd focused on serving clients instead of serving my own ego. In a stunning turn of events, Patricia Webb called me with an offer I never saw coming. Would Whitaker Strategy & Co. consider acquiring Pinnacle's remaining assets and client contracts? "Sarah, Richard is ready to sell. The asking price is $75,000 for the office lease, furniture, and 2 remaining client relationships." I sat in stunned silence. $75,000 was a fraction of what those assets were worth, and it would give me a larger office space in a prime location while eliminating my only remaining local competitor. The irony was delicious. Richard's own CFO was negotiating the sale of his company to the woman he'd fired 8 months earlier. The student had become the teacher, and the teacher was begging for mercy. "Patricia, I need time to think about this. It's a big decision." "Of course. But Sarah, you should know that Richard is desperate. If you don't take this offer, he'll probably have to declare bankruptcy within 60 days. After Patricia hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the city. 8 months ago, Richard had fired me with 2 weeks severance. Now, he was offering to sell me his entire company for less than I'd made in the past quarter. The Wheel of Fortune had come full circle, and I was the one sitting on top. After consulting with Lisa Rodriguez and my accountant, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I declined the acquisition offer, but proposed something different. I called Patricia Webb with my counterproposal. I'll hire you as my CFO if you're interested, and I'll offer employment to Pinnacle's 2 remaining junior staff members. I want to make sure good people aren't harmed by Richard's poor decisions. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, that's incredibly generous. What about the client contracts? I'll honor Pinnacle's existing contracts at their current rates, providing continuity for those businesses. They shouldn't suffer because of this transition. The gesture was both strategic and compassionate. I'd gain experienced staff while demonstrating the leadership qualities that made my clients loyal in the first place. And Richard? Richard will have to find his own path. I'm not interested in buying his problems, but I won't let his problems hurt innocent people. By taking the high road, I'd eliminated my competition without destroying lives. The 2 remaining Pinnacle clients would get better service, the employees would have stable jobs, and I'd expand my team with proven talent. Sometimes the most effective victory is the one that lifts others up instead of tearing them down. 1 year after my termination, Whitaker Strategy & Co. occupied a beautiful downtown office suite twice the size of my original space. We'd grown to 15 employees and had a client roster that included 12 major accounts, with a waiting list extending 4 months into the future. The business I'd built from my firing had become more successful than Pinnacle ever was. We'd won 3 industry awards, been featured in 2 national business publications, and I'd been elected to the board of the Oregon Marketing Association. Standing in my corner office, looking out at the city where I'd spent my entire career, I felt proud of what we'd accomplished. Not just the business success, but the way we'd done it, with integrity, respect, and genuine care for our clients and employees. Maria knocked on my door. Sarah, the Oregon Small Business Excellence Awards Committee called. They want you to deliver the keynote address at their annual ceremony. I smiled, remembering that first day when I'd walked out of Pinnacle with nothing but a cardboard box and a plan. The journey from terminated employee to keynote speaker had been challenging, but every step had been worth it. Tell them yes, I said. I'd be honored. The story had come full circle, but this was just the beginning of a much larger adventure. I encountered Richard at a downtown coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. He was meeting with someone about a brand advisor position at a larger agency. He looked older, worn down by months of stress and professional failure. Our conversation was brief but necessary. I asked about his family and genuinely wished him well in his job search. Richard's response revealed how much he'd changed. I should have treated you better, Sarah. I see that now. I was so focused on making my mark that I forgot the people who'd helped me build something worth marking. The moment was uncomfortable, but important. Richard had finally recognized how his ambition without wisdom had destroyed everything he'd worked to create. We all make mistakes, Richard. The important thing is learning from them. He nodded, looking down at his coffee. I learned too late, but I'm glad things worked out for you. You deserved better than what I gave you. Walking away from that coffee shop, I felt closure. Richard's acknowledgement didn't change what had happened, but it confirmed that justice sometimes comes in unexpected forms. The man who'd fired me with 2 weeks' notice was now hoping someone would give him a chance at a fresh start. Life has a way of balancing the scales. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Oregon Small Business Excellence Award ceremony, looking out at an audience of entrepreneurs, business leaders, and dreamers. My keynote speech was titled, Rising Through Integrity. Success isn't about defeating your enemies, I began. It's about building something so valuable that competition becomes irrelevant. I spoke about the temptation to seek revenge when wronged, but emphasized that true success comes from focusing on your own excellence rather than others' failures. The audience included several former Pinnacle employees, current clients, and industry leaders who'd witnessed my journey from termination to triumph. When someone treats you poorly, you have two choices: sink to their level or rise above it. I chose to rise, and that choice made all the difference. In the audience, I spotted Patricia Webb, who'd become one of my most valued employees. Maria sat at a table with our design team, beaming with pride. Even David Johnson was there, representing the clients who'd believed in me when I had nothing but potential. The most powerful response to injustice isn't revenge, it's success achieved with integrity. Because at the end of the day, it's not revenge if all you did was rise. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. But more important than the applause was the knowledge that I'd built something lasting, something meaningful, something that made the world a little bit better. Richard had fired me to make room for his vision. Instead, he'd freed me to build something greater than either of us had ever imagined possible. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened.